What would you do if your child saw something that shouldn't be there, something that could never be explained? In the quiet town of Misty Pines, a small, forgotten community surrounded by dense woods, Jess Carter and her 6-year-old daughter Ava were making their way back to their vacation home after a trip to the local farmer's market. The afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy, casting long, dancing shadows across the road. As they passed the old botanical garden on the edge of town, a place Jess had often marveled at for its lush, overgrown beauty, Ava, who had been quietly humming to herself, suddenly went silent. She gazed out the car window with wide, curious eyes and pointed towards the garden. "Mommy, look at all those people," Ava exclaimed with a mix of wonder and excitement. Jess, taken aback, glanced over but saw nothing unusual, just the tangled greenery and the crumbling paths of the botanical garden. "What people, sweetie?" Jess asked, her voice tinged with concern. "There's a lot of them," Ava continued, her small finger still pointed. "They're all wearing old-fashioned clothes and standing very still. They're looking at the flowers." Jess's heart skipped a beat. The garden, though beautiful, had always been an eerie place, with its unkempt foliage and shadowy corners. "Are they doing anything?" Jess asked, her voice shaky. "No," Ava replied, her gaze unblinking. "They're just standing there, like statues." Feeling a chill crawl up her spine, Jess quickly accelerated away from the garden, her mind racing with uneasy thoughts. She tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light or Ava's imagination. The unsettling feeling lingered as they reached home, but Jess decided to push it aside and focus on the evening routine. Later that night, as Ava was watching her favorite animated show, Jess noticed her daughter's expression shift from playful to somber. Ava turned to Jess with a serious look and said, "Mommy, those people we saw earlier, they weren't real." Jess's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you mean, honey?" "They weren't alive," Ava clarified. "They were like the characters in my show when we paused the TV. They were paused." A cold shiver ran down Jess's spine. She stared at Ava, trying to make sense of what her daughter had said. "You mean they were like statues?" "No," Ava replied, shaking her head. "They were standing still, but they were people, not statues. It's like they were waiting for something." Jess, feeling the weight of the eerie revelation, tried to comfort herself with rational explanations. Yet the unsettling thought of the paused figures lingered in her mind. The next day, she returned to the botanical garden with Ava, hoping to find some logical explanation for the strange encounter. To her shock, the garden was even more overgrown than before, with new sinister-looking shadows cast by the dense foliage. Jess and Ava wandered the garden, searching for any sign of the people Ava had described. But as they ventured deeper, Jess noticed that the garden seemed oddly quiet, the air thick with an unspoken tension. They reached an old, rusted greenhouse at the far end of the garden, its glass panes shattered and its frame partially collapsed. Peering inside, Jess saw something that made her blood run cold. Among the overgrown plants and debris, she glimpsed figures, faint, translucent shapes of people in outdated clothing, their eyes fixed on something invisible, their forms seemingly frozen in time. Jess grabbed Ava's hand and fled from the garden, her heart racing with fear and disbelief. As they drove away, Ava's quiet voice broke the silence. "Mommy, they were waiting for someone to come and unpause them." Jess looked at her daughter, her mind reeling from the implications. The garden, once a beautiful but neglected place, now seemed to harbor a haunting secret, an unsettling echo of lives suspended in time, waiting for release. As they left Misty Pines behind, Jess couldn't shake the feeling that they had brushed against something far beyond the ordinary, a chilling glimpse into a world where time itself seemed to stand still. The night was still, save for the distant hum of engines as the last few planes touched down at the old, nearly abandoned airfield. A group of aviation enthusiasts had gathered in the rusty hangar, swapping stories of ghost pilots and haunted runways. The air was thick with tales of eerie sightings, mysterious lights, and the tragic crash that had happened years ago. One of the men, a seasoned pilot named Rick, leaned in with a grin. They say if you walk across the runway at midnight, you can still hear the engines roaring, and the ghost of the pilot will try to finish his flight. But if you stand in his path, he'll take you with him. A young woman named Kate, new to the group and eager to prove herself, laughed it off. That's just an old wives' tale. Ghosts don't fly planes. Rick smirked and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small antique compass. I'll give you this if you walk the length of the runway at midnight. Just to prove you did it, drop this compass at the end. Kate shrugged, taking the compass. Easy. I'll be back before you know it. The runway stretched out in front of her, a long, dark strip of cracked asphalt. The moonlight barely illuminated the edges, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. Kate steeled herself, reminding herself it was just an old airfield. Nothing more. She began her walk, the only sound her footsteps echoing in the quiet night. As she neared the center of the runway, a strange feeling washed over her. The air grew thick, heavy with something she couldn't quite place. She quickened her pace, telling herself it was just nerves. But then she heard it, a faint rumble like the distant sound of an engine starting up. Kate paused, glancing around. There was nothing but darkness. The rumble grew louder, the ground vibrating beneath her feet, as if something massive was approaching. Her heart pounded in her chest. Desperate to prove her courage, she sprinted to the end of the runway, bending down to drop the compass. But as she stood up, she found herself unable to move. It was as if an unseen force held her in place. Panic surged through her as the sound of engines roared in her ears, louder and louder, until it felt like a plane was about to crash directly into her. She screamed, struggling to break free, but the force only tightened its grip. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the flash of lights bearing down on her and the overwhelming sensation of being lifted off the ground. When the others went to check on her, they found Kate lying at the end of the runway, her body cold and lifeless. The compass lay beside her, but her fingers were tightly clenched around a piece of torn fabric. Her own jacket, pinned to the ground by the compass needle. Kate had died of fright, her mind unable to distinguish between reality and the echoes of the past. The compass, now cold and lifeless, remained as a chilling reminder that some flights never truly end. Thanks for diving into the shadows with us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the truth is scarier than fiction. Until next time, sleep tight if you can.